There has been a long history of coal mining in South Wales, and there is evidence that the Romans knew of the existence of coal during their time in Wales. However, it was not greatly used until the 13th century, and the development of a major coal industry did not take place until the 19th century. Until 1833, the Darran River still flowed cleanly and peacefully, and the valley was as green and pleasant as it had ever been. But in that year, the frenzied mining activities taking place elsewhere in the South Wales valleys reached the Darran Valley. Major changes occurred with the coming of coal mining, and the valley's population increased more than 20 times during the latter half of the 19th century. Most of the early pit workings in the valley were small levels and drifts. These small operations were numerous within the valley, and there was also extensive development of pits, drift mines and levels north of Vochru. Deep mining started in 1839 with 3 pits sunk at Cwm at depths up to 154 yards. Mining ended at Cwm in 1908. 4 pits were sunk at Pantawain from 1850 at depths up to 276 yards. And the number 2 pit at Pantawain was operational until 1901. Sinking of the tunnel pits north of Vochru started in 1859, but was delayed by development of the Vochru pit. Work restarted in 1869 and was completed by 1877. The tunnel pits were sunk to a depth of 330 yards and employed around 2,300 men at their peak. The tunnel north pit closed in 1890 and the south pit remained in operation until 1924. Major mining developments took place in the latter half of the 19th century, with a number of deep mines developed within the valley from Groesvan to Vochru. Vochru Colliery was sunk by the Dowlais Iron Company. The number 1 pit opened in June 1863, and the number 2 attained full production by September 1866. Sinking of the number 1 shaft began in 1856, with the intention of working the 4-foot seam at a depth of 390 yards. On completion, it was the deepest shaft in Wales at that time. Coal was reached in November 1862, with full production achieved by June 1863. The Vochru numbers 1 and 2 pits both closed in 1924. Caiglas Mine, or Vochru Drift, was driven by GKN in 1920, but was short-lived and closed in 1924. It was reopened on a small scale in the mid-1950s and was finally abandoned in 1997. There was also a brief period of open-cast mining near Vochru between June 1965 to February 1967. Open-cast mining has recently been re-established on a large scale at Fossefran between Vochru and Merthyr. The Keelhail Colliery at the north end of Derry was opened in 1864 by the Bargoed Colliery Company. It was sunk to the Brithtr House coal seam at 30 yards deep. By 1918 it was in the hands of the Powell Dyffryn Steam Coal Company, who closed it and used the site for sinking Ogilvy Steam Coal Colliery. The Derry Newydd mine was also opened in Derry in 1864. It was sited close to the location of the present-day Derry Junior School. It was a much smaller operation than the Keelheil Colliery. It had only one shaft, 60 yards deep, and its existence was short-lived. It closed in 1875. The Darran Colliery, situated at the south end of Derry, was sunk in 1868 by the Rumney Iron Company. It had two shafts, each of which reached a Brithda house coal seam at 120 yards. On the 29th of October 1909, an explosion occurred, killing 27 men. Until this date, the mine was considered a safe mine, and throughout its history it had been worked with naked lights. The mine did reopen after the explosion, but closed in 1919. The Rumney Iron Company began sinking the Groes Vine Colliery to the south of Derry in 1902. Sunk to a depth of 720 yards, it was the deepest mine in the Darran Valley. It consisted of two shafts, Groes Vine and Penagarreg. Production started in 1906. Later it was owned by Powell Dyffryn, and subsequently it was taken over by the NCB. It was closed by the NCB for economic reasons in November 1968. At the time of closure, there were 731 miners employed, compared to a high of almost 1,600 in the 1930s. Ogilvie Colliery was sunk on the eastern bank of the Darran River, opposite the site of the old Keelheil Colliery to the north of Derry. The Powell Dyffryn Coal Company sank two shafts, north and south, between 1918 and 1923. During 1953, a colliery modernisation plan was implemented. The total scheme, which was completed in 1961, cost an estimated £2.75 million, 1.5 million of which was for the surface works. During 1971, a fire broke out underground in the South Pit, which put an end to coal production in that pit. The colliery closed in 1975, bringing an end to all significant mining activities in the Darran Valley. At the time of closure, the workforce was 490, compared with a peak in excess of 1,500 in the 1930s. Following the closure of the last deep mines in the Darran Valley, a series of major reclamation schemes took place, particularly at the Groes Vine Colliery and at the Ogilvie site, the latter being turned into Parc Darran. Parc Darran Country Park is well used by locals and people from much further afield. The caravan and camping site is well used in the summer, and the walks, cycle paths and lake fishing are in constant use. After over 100 years of major mining activity, the valley is returning rapidly to its former glory. A dramatic example of this is the result of landscaping to the south of Derry.